The county sold the dead sheriff's horse at probate auction for $9. Not one man in Mercy Wells raised a hand for it.
$9 once. $9 twice.
And the widow stood at the back of the yard and watched. Solomon Reasoner bought the animal because the silence had gone on too long, and somebody had to end it.
Take the saddle with him. The county does not want it.
4 days later, his saddler turned the skirt over on the bench, and Solomon Reasoner stopped breathing, and what he did next would change everything. The forge had been cold for 14 months. Winifred Halloway stood in the doorway of it most mornings before the sun came up. Not for any reason she could have explained to another person. She would look at the anvil. She would look at the rack of hammers her father had hung on the wall with his own hands in 1871. Then she would go and see to the boys' breakfast. It was the second week of April in 1886. Mercy Wells had come through a hard winter and a wet spring, and the road into town was still cutting up under wagon wheels. Winifred was 29 years old. She was tall for a woman and built through the shoulders and forearms in a way that people in that town had opinions about. Her hands were scarred across the backs from hot work. Her son Junie was 7. He was small and quiet and had his father's habit of watching a room before he entered it. "Ma," Junie said, "there's a man on the road." Winifred came out onto the step and looked. It was Ossian Frame, the probate clerk, coming up on a gray mule with a leather satchel across the pommel. He was a thin man with a soft, apologetic face, and Winifred had learned in the past year to dread the sight of him. He got down and took off his hat and did not come up onto the step. "Mrs. Halloway, Mr. Frame, I have got the schedule." He looked at the satchel and nodded at her. "The estate sale is set for the 21st. That is 19 days. I know how many days it is." "Yes, ma'am." He turned the hat in his hands. "I have to read you the list. It is the law. I am sorry." Winifred stood on her own step with her arms folded and listened to a man read out her husband's life in the order the county had catalogued it. 1 dwelling house and lot, Mercy Wells Township, 1 barn, 1 forge building and contents, being anvil, bellows, and assorted smith's tools, 1 saddle horse, bay gelding, aged, 1 stock saddle, 1 rifle, household effects. "The forge goes," Winifred said. "It is listed with the lot, ma'am. That forge was my father's. My husband never laid a hand on it in his life." "I understand that." Frame put his hat back on. "But the deed carries the whole parcel, and the debt is against the whole parcel. There is a note on this place for $460 that Sheriff Halloway signed in 1883. He never told me." "No, ma'am, they generally do not." Winifred looked out past him at the road. "What was it for?" Frame hesitated. "The county did not pay him for 11 months in '83, he said. There was a bad year. He kept the office open out of his own pocket, and he borrowed to do it. There are 4 other men in this county who could tell you the same story if they were not too proud to." Winifred did not say anything for a while. 19 days, she said. "Yes, ma'am, unless the debt is met." "And if I had $460, Mr. Frame, do you suppose I would be standing here in my father's apron at 6 in the morning?" Frame got back on his mule. "No, ma'am," he said, "I do not suppose you would." Inside, the house was clean and nearly empty. Winifred had been selling things quietly since January, a piece at a time, to men who came out from town at dusk so nobody would see them do it. What was left in the front room was a table, 4 chairs, a stove, and a saddle on a wooden rack in the corner. It was a stock saddle, plain, well made, the leather gone dark and soft with 20 years of use. Emmett had ridden on it every day of his working life. Junie was standing beside it with his hand flat on the seat. "Are they taking this too?" "They are." "Can we hide it?" Winifred crouched down in front of him. "No," she said. "We are not going to hide anything, Junie. Do you know why?" He shook his head. "Because your father spent 11 years telling this county what the law was," she said, "and I am not going to be the first one to show them he did not mean it." Junie thought about that. "That's stupid," he said. "It is," Winifred agreed. "It is also right. Sometimes those are the same." She put her hand on the saddle. Under the seat, where the skirt turned under, and no rider would ever see it, Emmett had burned his name into the leather with a heated wire when he was 19 years old, the way a boy does with a thing he is proud of owning. E. Halloway, 11 Ohio. Winifred had seen it perhaps twice in her married life. It was not a thing anybody looked at. Saddles are only turned over when they are being repaired, and Emmett had kept this one so well that it never was. "Your father was in the cavalry," she said. "I know. What did he tell you about it?" Junie considered. "He said the coffee was bad," he said. Winifred laughed, and then had to stop, because the laugh had gone somewhere she was not ready to follow it. The 21st came up cold and bright. They held the estate sale in the yard behind the courthouse, which was where they held everything in Mercy Wells. 40 or so people came. Most of them came to look. Winifred stood at the back with Junie beside her and her hands folded in front of her and did not move for 2 hours. She watched the table go for $1.10. She watched her mother's crockery go in a lot with a bucket. She watched Del Pruitt, who shod horses in town and had never once been better at it than she was, buy her father's anvil for $6 and load it onto a wagon while looking directly at her. Then they brought out the horse. He was a bay gelding, aged 16, sound enough, but plainly old. He had carried Emmett Halloway for 9 years, and he stood in the yard with his head low and his ears going back and forth at the noise. The auctioneer worked him for 4 minutes and got nothing. "Come on now," he said. "He is a good using horse. $20, $15. Somebody at the front said something Winifred could not hear, and 3 men laughed. $10, the auctioneer said. He had stopped enjoying himself. $10 for a sound saddle horse. Nothing. 9. The yard went quiet in a particular way that Winifred had heard before at her husband's funeral, when the preacher had asked whether any man wished to speak, and no man had. Junie's hand found hers and held on. $9 once, the auctioneer said. $9 twice. "I will take him." The voice came from the side of the yard, near the gate, where a man had been standing for some while without anybody paying him much attention. He was in his 60s, heavy through the chest, with white hair cut short and a face like something left out in weather. His coat was good, but not new. He had come in on a road horse by himself with no men behind him, which was why nobody had marked who he was. The auctioneer straightened up considerably. "Mr. Reasoner," he said. Solomon Reasoner ran cattle on 90,000 acres north of Mercy Wells and had done for 22 years. He came to town perhaps 4 times a year. $9, Reasoner said, "and take the saddle off the list and put it with him. I will give you $1 for it." "Sir, the saddle is a separate—" "Then sell it separately, and I will buy it separately. But I am not standing here while you try to get $2 out of a room that would not give you 10 for a horse." Reasoner reached into his coat. $10 for the both. Are we finished? They were finished. Winifred watched a man she had never spoken to pay $10 for the last 2 things her husband had owned, and she felt nothing at all about it, which frightened her more than grief would have. He found her afterward by the gate, while the yard was clearing. "Mrs. Halloway." Winifred turned. Junie moved half a step behind her. "Mr. Reasoner, I want to say something, and I want to say it badly, so I will just say it." Reasoner took his hat off, which she had not expected. "I did not buy that horse because I wanted him. I bought him because that yard had gone quiet, and somebody had to make it stop. I know why you bought him. Then I will not insult you by pretending otherwise." He looked at the animal tied at the rail behind him. "He is too old to work, and I have got no use for him. He will go out in a pasture and eat my grass until he dies of it. That is the whole of my intention." Winifred found her throat had closed and had to wait a moment. "That is more than he would have got," she said. "It is less than he is owed." "You did not know my husband?" "No," Reasoner said. "I did not." He put his hat back on. "There is a thing I would ask you," he said. "They tell me you shoe horses. My father was a farrier. I kept his forge for 9 years before I married, and 11 after. Are you any good?" "I am the best in this county," Winifred said, "and every man in it would tell you so if you asked him somewhere he could not be overheard." Reasoner looked at her for a moment. I have got 140 head of saddle stock and a drive to the railhead in 6 weeks, he said. My farrier drank himself off the place in February and I have been making do. I will pay $2 a day and found. Something went through Winifred so hard she had to put her hand on the gatepost. You are offering me work. I am. Mr. Reasoner. She got her voice under control. You should know before you say it in front of witnesses. There is not a man in Mercy Wells who will bring me a horse. It has been 14 months, not one. Why not? Because I am a woman and I am holding a hammer, and they have decided those two things cannot be true at the same time. Reasoner made a sound in his chest that was not quite a laugh. Ma'am, he said, I have got 90,000 acres and no farrier. I do not care what you are holding. Be at the North Gate Monday. Solomon Reasoner did not think about the saddle again for 4 days. It went into the wagon with a broken singletree and 2 sacks of nails, and it came off the wagon at the home place, and a hand carried it into the saddle shop and dropped it on the floor by the door, which is where things went when nobody had decided about them. Ezra Tillery found it on the Thursday. Tillery was 70 years old and had made and mended saddles for the Reasoner outfit for 19 years, and before that for the Army, and before that for his father in Ohio. He was thin and stooped and had gone deaf in one ear. He worked alone in a long, low room that smelled of neat's foot oil and beeswax. He picked the saddle up because it was in his way, and then he did not put it down because it was better than it had any business being. Now who made you? He said. He set it on the bench and looked it over. The tree was sound. The rigging had been replaced once, competently. Somebody had oiled this saddle every month for 20 years, and it showed in the way the leather moved under his thumb. He turned it over to look at the underside of the skirt, the way a saddler does. Then he stood there for a while. Then he went out into the yard and found a boy and told him to go and fetch Mr. Reasoner. And when the boy asked what for, Ezra Tillery said, "Go on now," in a voice the boy had never heard him use. Reasoner came in from the horse pens with his sleeves rolled. "Ezra, what is it?" Tillery did not answer. He turned the saddle on the bench so the skirt came up into the light from the window, and he put one finger beside the burned letters and stood back. Reasoner leaned in. E. Halloway, 11 Ohio. He read it. He read it again. Then he put both hands flat on the bench and did not say anything for a long moment, and Ezra Tillery, who had worked for him for 19 years and had seen him lose 160 head in a blizzard without changing his face, watched him go gray. "Where did this saddle come from?" Reasoner said, "You bought it, Tuesday last, at the county sale in Mercy Wells. $10 for it and the horse." "Whose sale?" "The sheriff's widow, Halloway." Reasoner sat down on the end of the bench. "Solomon," Tillery said, "you want me to get somebody?" "No. You have gone the color of a fish." "I said no." Reasoner rubbed his mouth with the back of his hand. "Ezra, do you remember Sandfork?" Ezra Tillery went very still. "I remember Sandfork," he said. "Say what you remember." "I remember I was a saddler with a supply column, and I had no business being anywhere near it," Tillery said. "I remember the guns came up on the flank at 4 in the afternoon, and the road was full of wagons, and there was nowhere for anybody to go." "Go on." "I remember a caisson went over," Tillery said slowly. "Wheel came off, and it went over into the ditch, and there was a man underneath the axle with his leg pinned, and the whole column moving out, and nobody stopping. He stopped. I never knew who cut him loose," Tillery said. "I did," Reasoner said. "I knew exactly." He looked at the saddle. "I was 22 years old, and I was under 600 pounds of gun carriage in a ditch outside Sandfork, Missouri, in the September of 1864, he said, "and the column went past me, not from cruelty. There was nothing they could do, and they had wounded up in front and orders behind, and they went past." "Solomon, a sergeant came back down that ditch on foot with a saw and a picket rope," Reasoner said. "He got the rope on the axle, and he got 4 men off the road at the point of his own revolver to haul on it, and when it came up 2 inches, he went in under there with me and dragged me out by the collar. It took 11 minutes. I counted them. I have counted them every year since." He put his hand flat on the burned letters. "I asked his name, and he told me, and I could not hold on to it," Reasoner said. I was out of my head. I had a leg on me like a stove length. By the time I could think again, the column was 40 miles gone, and there was nothing but a number in my head, 11th Ohio. I have had that number for 22 years, and I have never had the name to put in front of it. Ezra Tillery looked at the saddle. Halloway, he said. Emmett Halloway. Reasoner stood up. Who is in the churchyard at Mercy Wells and has been these 14 months, and whose wife I hired on Monday to shoe my horses, because I felt bad about a $9 gelding. He walked to the door of the saddle shop and stood in it with his back to the room. I have got 90,000 acres, Ezra, he said, and that man's boy watched me buy his father's saddle for $1. Winifred came up to the north gate on Monday morning on a borrowed mule with her father's tools in a canvas roll behind her, and Junie riding in front of her on the withers. She had expected to be turned away at the gate. She had prepared herself for it on the whole 11-mile ride. Instead, there was a man waiting. Mrs. Halloway. Yes. Colquitt. I run the outfit for Mr. Reasoner. He was a broad man in his 40s with a sunburnt neck and a way of looking somewhere past your shoulder. He said you would be along. There is a shop set up for you at the far end of the horse barn. Coal is laid on. Bellows wanted a new leather, and I put one in yesterday. Winifred sat on the mule and looked at him. You put a leather in the bellows, she said. I did. Why? Colquitt shifted. Because he told me to, he said. And ma'am, since we are being plain about it, I will say I told him I did not think much of the idea, and he told me my opinion was noted, and that is where the matter presently stands. I appreciate you saying it to my face. I would rather you heard it from me than from behind me. Mr. Colquitt, Winifred said, how many of your 140 head are lame right now? He hesitated. Some. How many? 11 or 12. Then you have got a problem that is not me, Winifred said, and got down off the mule. She worked 11 days. She worked from before light until she could not see, and she did not talk to the hands, and the hands did not talk to her. And Junie sat on an upturned bucket at the end of the barn with a slate and did his letters and watched everything. The horses she put shoes on stopped being sore. That was noticed. Nobody said anything about it, but a horse that had been favoring a foot on Tuesday would be moving square by Friday, and men who work stock notice that whether they want to or not. On the 9th day, Colquitt came down to the far end of the barn and stood in the doorway. You do them cold, he said. Mostly. Pruitt in town does them hot, says it is a better fit. It is a better fit, Winifred said. She did not look up. It is also a faster way to ruin a foot, and hot fitting in the hands of a man in a hurry will cook the soul, and you will not know it for 3 weeks. Pruitt has been doing our horses when we could get him. I know he has, Winifred said. I can see it. Colquitt stood there a while longer. You want a boy to work the bellows for you? I have got a boy. He is 7. He is mine, Winifred said. And he is learning a trade, which is more than his father had at that age. Colquitt looked over at Junie on the bucket. Junie looked back at him without blinking. All right, Colquitt said, and went away. It started on a Tuesday, and it was general by Thursday. Reasoner had 140 head of saddle stock, and the drive was 11 days out. And on the Thursday morning, Colquitt counted 41 animals that would not travel. They stood in the pens with their weight rocked back onto their heels. Some of them would not pick a foot up at all. 2 were down and would not rise. By Friday, it was 60. Reasoner stood at the rail with his hands on the top pole and his jaw set and listened to men tell him things. Del Pruitt came out from town and looked at 14 horses over the course of a morning and gave his opinion, which was that it was a fever coming up through the wet ground, that it was in the whole valley, and that there was nothing to be done but rest them and hope. Rest them, Reasoner said. 6 weeks. Maybe 8. The drive goes in 11 days, Mr. Pruitt. There's $40,000 of beef standing on my north range, and a buyer in Cheyenne who does not wait. Then I am sorry for you, Pruitt said, but I cannot make a sick horse well by wanting it. 2 more farriers came out from Rock Bench and from Antler Crossing over the weekend and said versions of the same thing. Ground fever, bad spring, nothing to do. On the Sunday evening, Merritt Van Trees rode up to the home place in a good buggy. Vantrees bought and sold cattle out of Cheyenne, and he had been trying to get at the Reasoner North Range for 6 years. Solomon, Merritt, I hear you have got a horse problem. News travels. It does. Vantrees looked out at the pens. I will take the North herd off your hands at $11 a head, standing where they are, and you can keep your lame horses and your troubles both. They are worth 26. They are worth 26 if they get to a railhead, Vantrees said pleasantly. Standing on grass in Wyoming, they are worth what a man will give you, and I am the only man here. Winifred had been in the shop since 4 that morning. She had not been asked her opinion. Nobody had asked her anything in 11 days, except whether the coal was holding out. But she had shod 19 horses in that time, and 40 of them were now standing lame that she had never touched. And she had gone out to the pens on the Friday night with a lantern after everybody else had gone in, and she had picked up 11 feet. On the Monday morning she walked up to the house and knocked on the front door, which no hand on that place had ever done. Reasoner opened it himself. Mrs. Halloway, I need 8 minutes of your time, and I need you to not send me away for the first 4 of them. He stood back from the door. She came in and put a horseshoe down on his hall table. It was a used shoe, pulled, still crusted. That came off your gray mare on Friday night, she said. Look at the inside of it, not the outside. Reasoner picked it up and turned it over. I am looking. What do you see? Nothing. A shoe. Look at the color of the metal where it sat against the foot, Winifred said. That blue-black. That is scorch, Mr. Reasoner. That is what happens when a hot shoe is set down on a hoof and held there. A second is fitting. 4 seconds is cooking. That shoe was held on until it burned through the horn into the sole, and it was done on purpose, because no man does it by accident 60 times. Reasoner stood very still with the shoe in his hand. Pruitt said fever. Pruitt said fever because Pruitt did it, Winifred said. Every horse standing lame in your pens was last shod by Del Pruitt out of Mercy Wells. Every horse standing sound was shod by me in the last 11 days. There is not one exception in 140 head. I went and looked at all of them with a lantern because I did not believe it either. That is a hanging accusation. It is. That is why I brought the shoe, and not my opinion. Reasoner looked at the metal a long moment. Why would he? I do not know why, Winifred said. I know he was in Vantrees' stable in Cheyenne for 2 years before he came to Mercy Wells, and I know that a man who wants your North herd cheap needs your horses off their feet in the spring, and I know I am a farrier and not a lawyer, and I am telling you what is in the iron. Reasoner set the shoe down on the table. Can they be brought back? The ones with the sole burned through? No. 6 or 8 of those will never be sound. The rest can, if you take the shoes off tonight and pack the feet, and I get to every one of them before Thursday. That is 60 horses in 4 days. Yes, by yourself. I have got a boy on the bellows, Winifred said, and I will need Mr. Colquitt to hold feet, and I will need somebody to tell your hands that a woman is going to be giving orders in that barn until Thursday. Reasoner went to the door and put his head out and shouted for Colquitt in a voice they heard at the bunkhouse. They pulled shoes by lantern light on the Monday night, all of them, every horse in the pens, and Winifred went down the line with a knife and a rasp and pared out the burned horn until she found clean tissue underneath, and packed the feet with pine tar and oakum, and by 3 in the morning her hands had swollen so that Colquitt had to cut her glove off with a pocket knife. She was back at the forge at 5. Colquitt held feet for 11 hours on the Tuesday and did not speak except to say which horse was next. On the Wednesday he sent 2 hands to the far barn to build up a second fire and set a second anvil, and stood at Winifred's shoulder and learned to nail so that she could shape. You are holding the hammer wrong, she told him, 4 hours in. I have held a hammer before. You have held a hammer. You have not held this one. She stopped and put her hand over his on the handle and moved his fingers down 2 inches. There, let the weight do it. You are trying to force a nail through a wall, and it is a shoe. Colquitt drove the next one clean. He looked at it. Huh, he said. By Thursday morning, they had done 51 head. 8 would never be right, and were turned out. Winifred had not slept more than 9 hours in 4 days, and her forearms were burned in a band above the wrist where the sparks had come off the anvil. At noon on Thursday, Colquitt walked a string of 12 out of the pen at a trot in front of Solomon Reasoner and every hand on the place, and every one of them moved square. Nobody cheered. Men who work stock do not cheer. But a hand named Willits took his hat off, and then another one did, and Winifred stood in the barn doorway with her arms hanging and watched a yard full of men take their hats off and had absolutely no idea what to do with her face. The drive went on the Monday and reached the railhead at Rock Bench on the Friday, and the pens there were full of cattlemen and buyers, and the association had its spring meeting in the yard office because that is where everybody already was. Merritt Vantrease was there. So was Del Pruitt, who had been paid and had not yet had the sense to leave the territory. Reasoner brought the Halloways up on the Friday in the wagon. "I do not want to go in there," Winifred said. "I know it. Those are the same men who would not bring a horse to my shop." "They are," Reasoner said. "That is why we are going in." The yard office was full and loud, and it got less loud as they came through the door, the way a room does. Solomon Reasoner walked to the front of it and put a horseshoe down on the table where the association secretary kept his book, and then a second one, and then a third. "I have got 60 of these," he said. "Every one of them came off a horse of mine, and every one of them was set by a man in this room. There is a scorch on the inside of every one that no farrier in this territory can look at and call an accident." He looked at Vantrease. "And there is a man in this room who offered me $11 a head for the North Range 8 days after it started." Vantrease stood up. "That is a slander, and I will—" "Sit down, Merritt," said somebody near the wall, and Vantrease looked around the room and found the room and sat down. Reasoner turned. "The reason I know what I am looking at," he said, "is that a woman that this valley would not hire told me. She went out with a lantern at night and picked up 140 feet. 'Cause nobody had asked her anything. She saved my drive, and she saved my herd, and she did it in 4 days, with a 7-year-old on the bellows." He put his hand out toward the door. "That is Winifred Halloway," he said. "Her father was Amos Coyne, and he kept the forge at Mercy Wells for 30 years, and half of you learned to ride on horses he shod. And since November of '84, not one of you has brought her a nail to hold." Nobody said anything. Then Ezra Tillery stood up from a chair by the window. He was an old man, and it took him a moment, and he had a bundle under his arm, wrapped in sacking, and he went up to the front of that room slowly with everybody watching him. "There is a part of this Solomon has not said," Tillery said, "because he cannot get through it, and I can, so I will." He put the bundle on the table and unwrapped it. It was the skirt of a saddle, cut free of its tree, laid out flat with the underside up. "That says E. Halloway, 11th Ohio," Tillery said. "It was burned into that leather by a boy of 19 who was proud of a saddle. 22 years ago, at a place called Sandfork, that man went back down a ditch under fire, alone, with a saw and a picket rope, and got a case on off a 22-year-old teamster who was pinned under the axle and left for dead by his own column." He looked around the room. "That teamster is standing behind me," Tillery said, "and he has got 90,000 acres. And Emmett Halloway went into the ground at Mercy Wells 14 months ago, owing $460 he borrowed to keep a sheriff's office open in a year. The county did not pay him, and this town sold his horse for $9, and I stood in that yard and watched it." He folded the leather over. "I was at Sand Fork, too," Ezra Tillery said. "I was in the third wagon, and I went past that ditch, and I did not stop. I have been making saddles for 19 years, about 40 miles from that man's forge, and I never once went and shook his hand. So I am not here to tell any of you what you should have done. I am here because I am 70 years old, and I would like to say his name out loud in a room with people in it." He stood there. "Emmett Halloway," he said, "11th Ohio. Merritt Vantrease was indicted at Cheyenne in the September on 2 counts of malicious injury to livestock and 1 of conspiracy, and Del Pruitt turned on him inside a week and testified for 3 hours and was run out of the territory anyway. The Cattlemen's Association of the Rock Bench District passed a resolution that autumn that no member would employ a farrier who could not show 3 years of clean work, which was aimed at one man, and everybody knew it. Solomon Reasoner paid the note on the Halloway place in April, 4 days after Ezra Tillery turned that saddle over on his bench, and he did it through the bank without telling anybody, and Winifred did not learn of it until Ocean Frame rode out in May to tell her the estate sale had been struck from the schedule. She rode 11 miles that afternoon to stand in Reasoner's front hall and tell him she could not accept it. "You cannot give me $460. "I did not give you anything," Reasoner said. "I paid a debt. There's a difference, and I would thank you to respect it. Mr. Reasoner, Mrs. Halloway." He was leaning on the newel post, and he looked older than he had in April. "I was 22 years old, with a gun carriage on my leg, and a man I did not know came back down a ditch for me when there was no reason on this earth to do it. I have made a great deal of money since. I have not done one single thing in 22 years that was worth what he did in 11 minutes. He straightened up. "I cannot pay him," he said. "He is in the churchyard. You are what is left, and I am going to pay you. And if that offends you, then you may be offended, but you will be offended in your own house." Winifred stood in the hall a while. "That is not an argument," she said. "No." Reasoner agreed. "It is a decision. I have found they are more useful. They built the new forge at Mercy Wells in the autumn on the lot behind the mercantile, stone to the sill and timber above, with a double bay and a second anvil. Colquitt hauled the stone. He came in on his own time with 2 hands and a wagon and would not discuss it, and when Winifred tried to pay him, he told her that he had been holding feet for 11 hours a day in the spring and had got a trade out of it for nothing, and that they could call it square. His boy Willem was apprenticed there in November. He was 11 and useless for 6 weeks, and then abruptly was not. Del Pruitt's old shop on the Rock Bench Road stood empty a year, and then somebody put a feed store in it. There is a sign over the door of the new forge at Mercy Wells. It is oak, and the letters are burned in rather than painted, because Winifred did them herself with a heated wire. Halloway and Son. Junie Halloway was 9 years old the spring the second anvil came, and he could not yet swing a hammer that would do any good, but he could hold a foot and he could read a hoof, and he had begun to be able to tell from across a yard when a horse was going to be trouble. Winifred found him one evening in the empty shop with the fire banked, turning something over in his hands. It was the saddle skirt. Ezra Tillery had brought it out in a wrapped parcel the week after Rock Bench, along with the rest of the saddle, rebuilt on a new tree and oiled, and had refused to say a word about the cost of it. Junie had the skirt turned over to the burned side. "Ma," he said. Did he know? Did who know what? Pa. Junie ran his thumb over the letters. When he was under there getting that man out, did he know it was going to matter? Winifred sat down on the edge of the bench. "No," she said. "He did not know anything except that there was a man in a ditch." "Then how did it matter?" "That is the part nobody can explain to you," Winifred said. "You do the thing because it is in front of you, and then you go home, and you get married, and you take a job that does not pay, and you borrow money you should not borrow to keep an office open, and you die of a bad chest in the winter, and you never find out." She took the leather from him and turned it in the firelight. 22 years, she said. He carried that saddle every day, and he never once turned it over. She handed it back. "Hang it on the wall," she said, "not the letters out. The way he had it. He never needed to see them, and neither do we." Junie hung it on the wall above the bellows, plain side out where it stayed. Outside the door the light was going off the hills, and a man was coming up the road, leading a horse that was favoring its off-fore, because they came now, all of them, all the time, and that is where we will leave Winifred and Junie and the forge at Mercy Wells. I hope this story gave you a quiet hour away from the noise of the day. I always wonder how you spend this time with me. Perhaps you are driving a long stretch of road, or washing up after supper, or sitting somewhere warm with the lamp low. Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and I would truly love to know what country you are watching from. It always amazes me how far these stories travel. If you would like to ride along on the next one, a like and a subscribe mean more than you know. Thank you for spending this time with me.